My name is Peter Shelton. I'm a sculptor. I live in Los Angeles, California, actually in Venice, and I've been in Los Angeles since 1969. I was always the kid as a young boy interested in making and building things and had a real knack for that. I came from kind of rural mechanical families in Ohio. So my father's mother's family were the Studebaker family, same as the car company. Came to this country in the 1730s as blacksmiths. So I had a long history in the family specifically, and then I used to work with my dad's first cousins in the summers in their machine shops and their welding shops and their kind of specialty fabrication shops. So I had a long history with that. I went to college at a place called Pomona College out in Claremont, California. Initially at Pomona College, I was a pre-med student. For a while I was an anthropology major, then I became a theater major. All the way through college I took art classes and finally ended up as an art student at the end. After college I went back to Southwest Ohio and I went to welding school as an alternative to going to art graduate school. I wanted to do something much more hands-on. Came back to LA, opened up my first studio in 1974 in East Santa Monica, and then sort of fell into a kind of depression of actually trying to figure out how to both survive as a young artist and actually what would I actually make as an artist. Eventually I ended up going to graduate school at UCLA. That was a really useful period where I really was very busy, and when I got out of that I started making very large architectural forms. So things that you could walk around in, bump into, crawl through, ride through in various ways. All of these things were with the idea that somehow the meaning of the work, significance of the work again, would somehow come as much through your own body and your own senses as it would from, kind of a cerebral process. And I think that was an emphasis in California in general, because I think a lot of artists actually found that there were so few venues and opportunities for showing their work that their studios became a kind of venue. And at some point it was very easy for artists not even to think about the studio as a place where you made specific objects, but the studio itself became a kind of object, became a kind of envelope for experience. It was a long process of not only continuing to make fabricated works, but I began to want to make works that had a much more specifically kind of sensuous, not necessarily representationally figurative quality, but had a lot more references to the body. At some point I started making sort of smaller studio works that I called tight-fitting architecture. So the idea that these big architectural forms started to become more like skins or shells that could be like a bodice or a kind of a breastplate or some other kind of form. And somewhere in there I started modeling and carving things and trying to figure out ways to actually make things, because I didn't really learn any of this in school. I had to kind of find my way through it. And the other way I guess I sort of snuck up on slightly figurative things was because of my pre-med background. The piece I was working on in there is called Four-Header. I was very interested in this famous painting of Caravaggio. It's called The Doubting of St. Thomas. So I think I started off with the idea of I'm going to make a kind of sculpture that relates to their attitude towards each other. But to me, I was also thinking about them as a header, as a manifold, right? So it's kind of a little bit like the aorta in the heart. I like the idea that it's more about the spatial relationship between those heads, and that's kind of what started the whole thing. And it will hang off the wall in very much the orientation that you see it on that little rack. So in space in front of you see these sort of four heads with their sort of necks coming off. I tend to get very impatient with staying in one place with the work. So I went through a period where you've seen some of the work in the studio where the works are very bulbous and very almost kind of Baroque, and there's quite a bit of movement to them, and they're twisting and turning, and which I like because it kind of forces you to move around the work, and so you don't just experience it from one point of view. Also, I like the idea that there's kind of a macro micro thing in the work, where sometimes you're looking at something and says, is that a big something that I already know that normally is really tiny, or is that a reduced thing that's very large? After doing these very big, round, bulbous, full sorts of forms, I wanted to, and this would be typical of the way I'd work, I decided I was going to try to make a work that pulled back to the wall. Its reference to the body would be, in some cases, there might be a limb or an arm or small appendages. In other cases, the reference to the body is almost as if you're looking at a kind of generic sort of surface that feels like flesh or the movement of the body, or is sort of alive in terms of the undulation of the surface. I would like to think that I've gotten closer and closer to having, in the breadth of my work, the differentiation of the reality of our own body. You have all the components, all the the organs and so forth, and then you have these sort of systemic relationships, and then you have these broader kind of relationships which could never be objectified. Sometimes I make work that's very vocabulary, very organ-like, and other times I like to make work that I think of as being about those, totalizing those more general kind of conditions, and then sometimes I've tried to put things together.